Hi, this is Ellen Madono coming to you from Tokyo Homeopathy in Kamakura. And we are on the second part of a two-part series. In the first part, I interviewed the daughter of a man who is suffering from seizures. He's 80 years old. I hope you've seen that video already. You may be able to understand this video without seeing it, but the other video is meant to help you to understand case taking. This video is meant to help you to understand how I'm analyzing the case. It's a bit long because I'm doing this to help you to understand the analysis of a chronic case. If this were a flu case, it would be much simpler. But it's a chronic case, and I haven't had a chance to interview the man. And his daughter, who is a student, is the one who interviewed her. So we've got a lot of problems with information gaps. Actually, in real life, this kind of case happens, and I think it's something that you should be ready to think about. Life is never perfect in my experience. So I have a few instructions for you because not everybody is interested in chronic case taking or chronic cases, analysis of chronic cases. You can actually, for instance, break up this video. It's a bit long. And right here, this is a video that Dr. Fry made. But if you look down here, you can see how many minutes into the video he is, okay? When you stop the video, just take a note of this time. You can also skip through the video. I have these screenshots, this kind of a page here, to tell you where the video is broken up. So if you skip through this, you will see these little shots, and you know that that's where I'm introducing a new topic. And so you might want to listen in or look at the topic, even if you're not interested in chronic case analysis, just to get some of the ideas, because the difference between chronic and acute isn't that sharp, and many of the tips that I'm giving apply also to acute case taking. So here again, you can see the time, and you can see the screenshot here. So listen to as much as you want, and don't bore yourself or overwork yourself listening to a video that's too long. It's long because I'm not selling anything. I don't want to spend a lot of time uploading these videos. You should not be worrying about memorizing detail. I give you all kinds of detail, but it's mainly to give you an idea of how the example works. In practical homeopathy, it's not about rules. There are a few rules, but not very many. And you can also arrange for tutoring to meet your personal needs. The idea is that if I record these tutoring sessions, you can actually learn from somebody else's learning process if you have similar interests and needs. In this case, we're looking at the post-seizure problem. We're looking for a different remedy because actually we got some new information. This was the pre-analysis, and when you do a case, it's very important to figure out what are the major details in the case. Some cases I do this in my head, but I often write it down. By putting things together, you begin to see what are the big themes. For instance, I saw here sexuality as a big theme. The daughter of the old man is not talking about sexuality. She doesn't see her father in that context, but he has a prostatitis and radioactive seeds planted in his prostate, and he passionately loved her mother. So when her mother died, of course, this was a great loss, and that's part of the case. He had been taking some kind of medicine given by the doctor, and this was causing a senility, and he got off of that. But as a result, he's afraid of what medicine can do, and probably other experiences too. He's a woodsman. He loves nature. You notice there's nothing pathological about this. This is actually pretty normal. All of this is pretty normal. This is what we call the disposition. These are normal parts of him. We want to know that part too. We're not just looking for what is wrong with him. He loves his family and his community. He's accepted. He has a very strong work duty orientation. And he's very self-sufficient, so he goes on long walks trying to keep himself in good shape. I notice this kind of theme here of rigidity, both in his mind and his body, and he's very stubborn. So after the seizures, his body being extremely rigid and painful from the seizures is a big problem. And in the seizures, he also becomes unconscious. He also is allergic to bees, so he has anaphylactic shock. In that case, he also becomes unconscious. And when he has the seizures, the blood pressure goes down. And so the anaphylactic shock and the seizure, to me, are kind of a similar reaction. And it's a reaction to an insect in the case of the anaphylactic shock. So this word insect is a big word for me just because of that. Now, we don't know what happens before the seizure, and post-seizure, he's got memory loss. So there's a lot of detail that's not there. This kind of analysis is something that you want to do. And if you saw the first video, you'll see that we use the periodic tables to get the remedy gallium. But this was based on not having enough information, not a lot of detail about the seizure. So I couldn't focus on the seizure. And then I asked the daughter to go back and interview her father more. She's getting better at interviewing and knowing what is good information for homeopathy. Now she gave us some new information. So I'm rethinking, what is the main problem? Can we get to the core of the problem? This remedy here gets to this loss of his wife, this area here, mourning. When we get this information of the pre-seizure conditions, then I'm thinking, we know something about the seizure. And if we can include this information, we can help him with the seizure. But it's very important that we get this information clearly. And as you find out, this memory loss and the post-seizure state is not helpful. So we have a lot of factors against us in getting a nice, easy case. In the process of this, my student is learning case taking and she's learning case analysis. Let's kind of peek into her tutorial, what she learned in the process of doing this case. One thing is we're constantly looking for higher reliability of the symptoms. And Dr. Fry has done a lot of research on what information is more reliable in the Bowenhausen repertory, in his source. The second thing is we want to get the symptoms closer to the time when the patient had his most pressing problems, the time of the seizures. This was not possible at first, but with more information, it became possible. So we're getting closer to the patient's core problem. So at first, the student sent me a repertory chart, something like this. I want you to notice the robot may not have noticed this. At least the robot didn't tell my student that there was a problem here. And the problem is when you open up the program, it's set to show you the highest number of hits. So this remedy here has the highest number of hits. But we are using the robot to figure out the polarity differences. And the polarity differences are here. And if you look down these numbers here, this remedy belongs at the top. Okay? I'm going to let you in on a secret about this. I actually know this remedy. So I'm not a robot. Homeopathy is not about just relying on a robot in a program or getting a program to do your thinking for you. I know this remedy. So I got all excited and I said, oh, this information is going to come out because this remedy is a really good remedy. At the same time, I want to use the program to find the remedy because you, if you are new to homeopathy, don't know this remedy. And you can't guess that this is a really important remedy. There's no way to guess, excepting my student would have gotten this answer had she set up her program correctly. And all of my tutorials with new students have come up with the same problem with setting up the program. It's set up for the number of hits, and we really need to know, we need for this to be here. You have to click here at polarity differences. Otherwise, you are not going to get the lineup that we want. I wanted this to be at the top, but she had to press here at polarity differences, okay? So this is an Excel spreadsheet that the program makes for you. But, yeah, just remember that. There's something else. She had it set up to look at the symptoms first. So all these yellow and red symptoms here, these are middle reliability and low reliability. She had it set up to look at the symptoms because when you open up the program, this list comes up, which is all the rubrics in the Bowenhausen repertory, in Dr. Fry's edited repertory. Really, in the beginning, we want this checklist. So you can't just start to work without setting up the program, okay? So we'll go into this just a little bit more, but we can't use the robot if you don't press here, and the checklist, going to the checklist first, will get you the answer faster, okay? Having said that, remember, the student did get the right answer. She just didn't have it set up right. So what she did may be a very good strategy. And what she did was she looked for all of the symptoms that pertain to her father. All of the symptoms that pertain to his problem with having these epileptic seizures. I asked her to pare it down a little bit more, okay? So we started reading rubrics, she started, and she tried different strategies. Okay, so she came first with this, and I guess this is the pared down one, and she removed all of these red ones here, the low reliability ones. Unless that one is extremely important, you probably don't want to use those. He has sleep prolonged, and that's kind of saying the same thing. He's very tired and has very long sleep, okay? And his sensorium, which means his senses, were deadened. But you have here understanding loss and memory loss. So it's kind of saying the same kind of thing. Which one is more important is something we talked about in the first video, and he puts a high emphasis on his intellectual ability. Okay, and this is a man who is not highly educated. We're talking about just being able to think rationally. She removed all the symptoms that don't pertain specifically to the seizure. And this is what happened. Oh no. Oh no. You notice here you got all these grayed out places. When you have grayed out places, that means that you don't have to check those. But here, she doesn't have any grayed out places. There really aren't enough rubrics here. The grayed out places are called contraindications. And nothing here is very peculiar, although thirst absent, I think, is peculiar enough. But there just aren't enough rubrics to find a remedy. I mean, this is as bad as using a huge repertory. This is what happens when you use a huge repertory. So let's first look at these contraindications. If you have forgotten what a contraindications are, you're with a lot of other people. Contraindications. This is CI. It looks like CL, but it's CI. The lungs absorb. They carry a lot of. They have a lot of blood vessels around them, and all of the blood vessels go close to the veins go close to the arteries, and they pick up this oxygen. So the blood that doesn't have any oxygen in it comes close to this oxygenated blood, and the blood goes. No, wait, that's not how. In the lungs, the blood picks up oxygen from us breathing. The lungs function like that, and so they absorb oxygen. So if his pulse were slow, that would be, I think, pretty normal. So I actually put it in there, although she didn't know, because the problem is when he has this low blood pressure, she's never there. Maybe she never thinks about taking the pulse also. If she took the pulse, because he has low blood pressure a lot, she might find that the pulse actually slows down, in which case this would be useful. But we don't know much about this case, so I put it in there just to see what would happen with the repertorization. And then this stuff about the digestive tract didn't help at all. Okay, so you just skip it. If there's nothing, the patient can't, the person who's helping you can't give you information, you just skip it. And all of this, of course, this was all a no, because he's a male and he's 80 years old, so he's not going to have much sexual instinct, and he's low on no urination problem, which is interesting because he has radioactive pellets in his prostate. So he should have had some urination problems, but he doesn't have them now. And he doesn't have problems sleeping, although earlier I think there was a rubric in here that she had that his sleep was worse. Maybe it's after the seizures, I'm not sure. So maybe I should have put, but this was a yellow rubric. These are the green, the high reliable ones, and none of these applied to him, except he sleeps too long. But again, that's a middle range reliability rubric. So, I wanted to know more about his urination, but she couldn't tell me much. And one thing I wondered was did he have trouble walking to the toilet? Okay, so I thought about these things, but they didn't bring out any kind of information for me. Now, we went over his disposition before, and but let's look at it in terms of the checklist. These are the only disposition rubrics on the checklist. They're very few, and in the actual pocketbook, the actual book, there are also very, very few, much more than this here, but it's relatively few, because Bowenhausen was looking for these modalities first. These are all modalities. What is better, what is worse? Those are called modalities. And Bowenhausen was interested in those modalities. MODALTIES. Okay, modalities. Modality. And when she did it, you notice that she took some of these having to do with his mind. And I think this is also emotion and sorrow, this kind of thing. I think in general it doesn't help that much to get all of these unless it's extremely central to the case. But, you just have to try it out. Okay, so the one thing that was on the list was he had trouble understanding things, more trouble understanding things, and this was very frustrating to him too. He's grieving because of his wife's death, but all of these are kind of unusual reactions to sadness or to people, and these he's very actually his grieving is a very normal kind of grieving, so none of them are here. Now, here's where we're getting to what's interesting to me and why I suddenly changed my strategy. I was first trying to just use the table of elements to find the remedy. But then she told me that he had walking problems before the seizure. And I was interested in this. One, it's rare, and contraindications are affected. This is what you find out after you begin to look. But for that reason, I looked at the movement rubrics scrutinized them. Now, what is happening here? A seizure has, according to common knowledge, it has 4 stages. Okay, so the aura stage is when it's beginning, and she's never there. Sometimes it begins in bed, so nobody even knows that he has a seizure. And then all this moving around and unconscious activity takes place, and then he's worn out from all of this, and this is what she finds out about it, and she comes and sees only this stage. So we get this little piece of information that he has vertigo and it's difficult for him to walk. Okay, so one of the kinds of auras is falling over, or having jerking motions. We don't know why he's having difficulty walking. I don't have any more information than that. Okay, so very bad information, actually. And really, my student is not to be blamed because she's not there. But he says he has difficulty walking. So automatically, you click walking aggravates. But when you think about what is happening, he's having an aura. What does walking aggravates means? If you look at this list, there are other symptoms that possibly could be used. And so I'm going to review through this just a little bit. He's very, very stiff, but when I asked her about this, she didn't think this was important. And getting up from sleep she didn't really even talk about that when in the first interview. And what could you say to elicit better information? He loses his memory, so I'm not sure this would be effective. But if he were not losing his memory so badly, you need to ask about his feet. How do his shoes feel? Can he put on his shoes and socks? Can he walk? Can he stand? Does he have frequent urination, or try not to go to the bathroom, or does he wets himself also during the seizures, not before? And dizziness also has different kinds of dizziness. There's the kind where the whole room moves around you, and the other kind where you feel like you are spinning. So what is the dizziness like? And so you only know about these things because you look up these rubrics in the repertory. And it turns out that dizziness is not the word that's used in homeopathy. Vertigo is. There's a whole chapter on vertigo. Bowenhausen has a whole chapter on vertigo too. So, but anyway, you like what I would do if I were her. I would realize he's dizzy, find out that vertigo is the way that people talk about dizziness, and then look it up. It's easier to look it up in a modern computerized repertory because they let you look up dizziness and tell you that vertigo is the word that's used. So it's a teaching, it teaches you about the repertory. That's how I learned, Okay, so think about the walking problem of an elderly person. Okay, he's got vertigo. He's mourning, so he looks down. I mean, he's sad. So he could be looking down. He could be looking down because his back hurts. Who knows? But I'm assuming he could be looking down. One of the things that you kind of want to know is when his blood pressure goes down, what happens to his feet? Even minor events of lowering blood pressure. Does he lose motor control of muscles? The seizure is beginning. This is what I was talking about, the aura. It's beginning, but it's possible that even without a seizure, when the blood pressure goes down, that there's a change in the way he feels about his feet, and so walking becomes more difficult. And this actually happens enough so that you don't have to take your information only from the seizures. You could take it also from other times when his blood pressure goes down, even minor lowering of blood pressure. Try to find out if there's a change down here with the lower body. Okay, or is it just that he's shaking and that sort of thing? Now, so you do this. You repertorize, and I repertorized using walking worst. I just used his words. He said walking was difficult, so I just put those in. Okay, and I get a list of remedies here. And I think when I was just beginning, I would immediately start looking up those remedies if I didn't know them, and these 4 all have brain issues. They all have brain issues, but so I look up the ones that have brain issues. But this is it's too early when you have a robot in the software that is helping you. Okay, and so one thing I'd look at these ones that have a red down here. Okay, but they're not. I'd look at what do they do to the contraindications, the ones that are red. Is that important? Do I want to have those red guys there? That's not the most. I haven't found that to be the most useful strategy. But there are lots of unreliable symptoms down here, which tells you that this is not as. I'm not using the robot of the of this software. But that kind of stuff is not as productive as it is to look at this section here and see what can you milk out of this. You think about this old man, and you've investigated how his feet are when he has blood pressure, low blood pressure, and you find out about his walking problems. Sometimes you have to talk to somebody many times, or what I do with family members is I keep notes, because my family doesn't want to talk about their difficulties, especially when I'm the helper. They want to make it look like they don't have any problems. So they're not as willing to talk about what I need to know to help them until they understand homeopathy, and then they become very willing, because they understand that I'm not just snooping or trying to make them feel bad. But in the beginning, your family members are just like irritated that you're talking about the stuff that makes them feel like they're less than wonderful, or things that they're unhappy about, So I'm looking at this walking aggravates here, and what happens is it cancels out a bunch of remedies, right? Here. 2 remedies here. And if you go down further, you find other remedies that it cancels out. And it's not too safe to just look at this page here. You have to go down further. There's a little button here, and you press that button and you can see the other side. So then I'm looking at, okay, what other ones can I try? How about movement worse? So I try one of these. Even he didn't. Is movement worse in general? Okay, so I put in movement worse, and what happens is you see that there's no change in the repertorization here. The lineup here is, at least at the front, is pretty similar. Okay, it brings up spigalia here, which is it's a brain nerve kind of remedy. That's great. I already know which remedy I think it is, so I'm not happy. But you don't know, and what do? Actually, you go down and look further is one thing you could do. But you also could look at this list more. He's having gait problems. Okay, could he be having gait problems? It becomes hard to keep his balance, maybe. And if you come to that, you come to this rubric, stepping hard aggravates. And when I saw that, I thought, whoa! I mean, not even thinking about the particular remedy that I think it is, but it was easy for me to think that a man with vertigo, who normally walks miles every day because he's trying to keep up his body, he's having vertigo, the tremors are starting, he's having some kind of problem keeping his balance. This one, to me, just made automatic sense when I think of a person who's having the kind of problems he's having. So, again, I ask all these questions, but I'm really interested in balance problems, and I think I would change these to kind of think more about the balance problems. Is he having balance problems? And you find that when you are talking about the problem with the patient, if they're willing to be talking with you, sometimes they become more aware. He's having memory loss problems. My student went back to him and talked to him about his seizures. She found out he's having problems walking before the seizure. I thought that was pretty good. It means that she has a nice relationship with her dad, and she could talk to him about it without him feeling that he's just exposing his vulnerability. This is very difficult with parents or people in your family. So I was very impressed that she was able to have this kind of conversation. We didn't get all the information we wanted, but that's pretty good. So, I'm just kind of a random kind of person, so I kind of thought maybe he's having a problem when if he has low blood pressure, he's having a problem when he gets up, because when you get up, suddenly your blood pressure changes. And so maybe that contributes to it. So resting and then suddenly moving, maybe he has more problems. Anyway, I tried it out. And I tried stepping harder. And lo and behold, my remedy came up top. Now, you noticed I took out walking. Okay? I took out that walking rubric. Stepping harder. I tried putting in a bunch of other ones, and they all, they were all good for my plan, for the way it should be. But if you have the walking worse in there, Conium just disappears, because it's one of those gray ones. And even though all of these are the same ones are here, the stepping worse is here. If you have the walking worse, it goes way down. Okay? And to tell the truth, it's way down there. You have to look way down there. And I don't know how you could I'm trying to think, how could you figure this out? You're thinking about his varicose veins. He has varicose veins, so maybe this getting up is a problem. It's hard to get the blood back up to his head. He gets vertigo. You just don't know what's happening. He's having a brain problem. He's fallen many times, and so he's actually had brain injury from falling. So you just, I'm not sure that you could find this. I think you could. My student found it the first time, remember? She found it the first time. So maybe all this stuff I'm talking about isn't all that important. But you look here and it's blank down here. So this is a red one for these, and these are, so we're not making use of the robot for these here, but at the same time, it's not a negative thing. It's not a problem. So anyway, I tinker around, and often when you're tinkering around, you notice something happens. When something like this lineup here completely changes when Conium comes up. So that's part of my strategy for how I figured this out. Another one is, say that this was these are the rubrics I chose. It's kind of arbitrary which ones you chose. If you look these up in the repertory, if you go down all of them and you're just trying to figure out how are these guys affected in the brain? So this person, the first thing you find out about them is that they get very fatigued taking care of other people. This one is always described in the context of high fevers. This one is described, the brain problems have to do with injury, grief, they have gait problems, they have intellectual issues, and they have sexual issues. Oh. Ring a bell with this patient? This one, the senses are dull. It's not a matter of intellect is dull. The senses are dull. And I had a hard time in the beginning seeing that senses being dull is different than affecting rationality. Okay, I didn't know this one, and I couldn't even remember it because I've never seen it before. I don't know anything about it, and you probably feel that way about a lot of these. This one has to do with nerve pain. I've used 3 of these remedies, okay, that I've listed here. And, some of them, you read them and they just don't make any sense, and it doesn't impress you, and you don't know what to do with it. Go with the one that really impresses you. If this one looks pretty good, go for it. There's some luck involved here, some intuition. So here's my student's original repertorization. She just looked for everything that was like her father and tried to keep it in this close time zone. And she didn't have my magical steps harder rubric, and she didn't have walking either. So she didn't have walking difficult. She didn't have those in there. So Conium came up really high. It came up at the top if you press polarity differences. Okay. So just remember this setup. This setup is like, if you don't get this right, you're not even standing at the batting base. You're not ready to bat at all. Okay. No, I think I put in all of these things. I put in the stepping worse. And so this was the top of the window. I'm sorry. This was the top. And it's down there, but it's not as far. So I got enough information here that's about the case, that makes sense for the case. I had all of these red ones, but none of these had any information. These red ones are just kind of generally not very useful. They're very small rubrics is what I'm guessing. So they don't tell you too much about the case, but they were good enough without the robot. If they're highly reliable rubrics, and they were good enough. So Conium came here, okay, and so I could find this thing. If you can't find the contraindication to question it, you got troubles. Okay. So, of course, your problem is, how would you know if it's way down here, right? You're looking at all this. This looks very confusing. But this contraindication and this thirst here, if there's a lot of contraindications in your case here, these are the rubrics that you want to look at and make sure that you have the most specific one, okay? And you want to look for what in that, among those, is there something in there that speaks more clearly about his condition, okay? Not what he said, not just walking was difficult, okay? No, it's far to the right, but I think you could find, at least you could see that this has got a lot of contraindications, and these are rubrics you're going to check. You're going to check very well, especially if you've got a case that, this isn't a very good case. We don't have enough information. We're not happy with this case, but it's not our fault. It's a difficult case. And then this pulse thing, where I think his pulse would be slow. I'm guessing, I don't have any information on it, but I put it in there. Okay, and this brings up Conium much higher. It goes up higher. But you can guess too. You can make educated guesses. You just try it out. And breathing was not affected. And it could have been affected since he has a heart problem. But it doesn't seem that that oxidation in the blood was a big major issue, right? These unreliable symptoms, again, I'm looking at those. I want to know more about them. Is this a difficult one? Is this a problem? I'm asking myself. Here, there's no symptom here, so it doesn't mean it's not reliable. Conium still might be reliable. Okay, so these are kinds of thoughts you're having as you're checking through. Now, you don't do this just on the basis of talking to the software's robot. If you may not be that type of person. You may not like what I've been doing and all this tinkering around, and it may not fit your personality. There are other forms of information that are very useful and very good for finding the right remedy. Okay, one of them is to use a Materia Medica. Now, I just put up a bunch of Materia Medica that I kind of use. I don't actually use this as a book. I don't keep it in my library. I use it. It comes in the software, and information comes up here, and I use it. There's nothing wrong with it. The amount of information is very small, so it's very elusive to me sometimes. But it's all of the work done by Vermeulen, this guy here, Vermeulen. All of the work done by him starts with Boraki. So, he's a major source for Vermeulen. I guess he's good enough for me. And from the beginning, Kent was like bedtime reading. He's easy person to read. If you don't, he has long lists of symptoms. I found that to be hard to read. But the rest of the descriptive part is extremely easy to read and very kind of entertaining, or it stirs the imagination. And Robin Murphy's Lotus Media, Materia Medica, if you're just going to buy one book, buy this one. If you can stand to buy a couple of them, Vermeulen is wonderful because he gives you all kinds of scientific information. Robin Murphy has some of that in here, and he has a lot of other kind of funky stuff in there, and he has a lot more remedies in here. 1,400, it's a lot. So, I use both of them, but, if you have to think about your budget, then, in the beginning at least, Patak is like a necessary one, especially for physical symptoms. And now I'm going to be teaching you about Jan Sholten's work because you can access it on this website. It will give you a quick analysis, sometimes this website information is not his newest information, and he doesn't have the best stuff up, and it's unreliable, but you have other sources. And I'm going to teach you how this system is working gradually, not all today. But now, I knew that Conium was given before, so I'm admitting to you that I knew. And the reason why I knew about Conium is not just because I read books on it, but I had one wonderful case of a guy who was mentally retarded and like 70 years old. And at the time I thought he was old, but now I'm 70 years old. I don't think it's old. Anyway, his case was a very unforgettable because he was sitting there telling me about how much you pay at the brothels and peeking under the skirt of his niece when she's going up the stairs, or, just kind of, he's mentally deficient, so he was going to school in the evening to be babysat, essentially, and they kept on giving him tests with multiple choice tests, and his scores began to rise with the remedy. So he had some kind of brain problem, and it seemed to help him. And he was kicked from behind and near his testicles, and that went away, and swelling of his nipples went away. So he was an unforgettable case. And he religiously took his remedy as I instructed. He was one of my best patients. So that's Conium. I do know Conium, but the question is, how do you go about researching Conium? Okay, I know Conium in this patient, and strangely enough, this patient doesn't sound at all like my student's father, but strangely enough, something resonated because I know more about Conium than just that case, because I studied it. And the way you learn remedies is not me getting up here and doing a song and dance about remedies. There are a lot of remedies you're going to learn because they're part of the research process to find a remedy that you need. And so the book is very expensive, but this Curative is free. $10 a year to be a member. It's not very expensive. I chose some of the remedies that are kind of brain remedies that came up in these repertorizations. Obviously, you could make all kinds of repertorizations, but I looked for the ones that had they have these mental problems, and this is the one that has high fevers. But the thing is, Jan Sholten describes this in terms of his emotional state, which, we're not talking about high fevers at all, but this fear of being powerless is not something that's generally you'll find in these kind of books necessarily. It's a lot of this information you won't find, because these modern homeopaths are very interested in the disposition of the patient, and that's something that you definitely want to know about. So you're going to be able to find it in this kind of literature, and it's a shortcut because you can know the disposition, whereas you may not know all these little itty bitty symptoms, but you're going to get to the right remedy much faster if you know the disposition. Nux machata is not a memory loss kind of problem. They're stupefaction. They're making automatic movements. It's a drug remedy. They're foggy. They're not there. And all of this is in this book, and I think it's probably on Curative too. And one little hint, nux machata is not the same as nux vomica. And when people say nux, they generally mean nux vomica because nux vomica is much more common as a remedy than nux machata. Okay? Nux machata is nutmeg. It's not a very common remedy. Okay, here's the remedy that I didn't know, and they feel half accepted. This is their disposition. They're not they don't feel accepted by their family or whatever. They're foolish, oversensitive, timid. This is not the patient. You see the numbers here? These are low numbers. These low numbers are people who don't feel accepted in their community. And then the spigelia. In general, it's kind of a nerve issue, sensitivity, nerve hypersensitivity, fear of pointed objects. And this is not our patient either, right? And there are low numbers here. For our patient, I'm not expecting very low numbers because he's very accepted in his company, in his community, and very well accepted in his family. So I'm going to give you some hints. We're going to do this many, many times, so I don't want you to memorize. Just begin getting the idea. Don't feel overwhelmed. I'm teaching you how to use a map that's somewhat familiar already because most people have been exposed to a periodic table, and at least you're exposed to kind of a database kind of format, and that's what this is. It's very easy to visualize. And so the first thing you have to decide, is this a plant, mineral, animal, or some kind of diseased tissue? We're not going to get into that, but we didn't have to think about this, partly because we used the polarity analysis. You could think about this once you got a line of remedies, and you're thinking you definitely want an animal, or you definitely want a plant, or whatever. If you've decided that already, that decision will help you. Okay, so we're talking about the periodic table of elements. And for the beginning, we're only talking about remedies in this area of the periodic table. As you see, it's much longer than that, okay? But these are most of the common remedies. They are at this row, and they're limited to carbon, silicon, iron, and the silver one is... There's some remedies, and there's some remedies down below, but I'm talking about common remedies that are often used. It wouldn't necessarily be in a small emergency kit, but at least these are fairly common remedies. You notice that in homeopathy, we label these by the name of the element that's most common in that row. In this case, it's iron. In this case, it's silicon, which is here. In this case, it's carbon. Okay, that's how they're labeled. Gallium, which is the one that we looked up for this patient, is over here, and it's not common. Okay, silver is the abbreviation for silver is Ag. When we did the lesson on sulfur and lycopodium, we found out that lycopodium is beginning to have a project in life. They're beginning to figure out what their projects are in life, and they're beginning to be committed to them. 10 is kind of the mature state, okay, for a remedy. So here's 10, you're building up to having a project, feeling included in your community, and at 10 you're mature, and then things start to go downhill, okay? We don't have to go into a lot of detail, but this is kind of the homeopathic markers. These are the markers for this periodic table, okay? And if you just understand that this is how we talk about it and how it's organized, you'll eventually be able to find your way around it, and it'll make sense when I say something is stage 10, or it's before stage 10 or after stage 10. This is going to make sense to you. Just now we're kind of considering what are the core characteristics of remedies that we saw in polarity analysis. First of all, if you're going to be using Jan Sholten's system, he's tried to get homeopathy to be acceptable in scientific communities. That means that we need to be using the scientific names for our remedies. And some of them have different names than I think Nux machata is Myristicum something or other. And so you have to look that up. Actually, it's really nice because the books like this are going to tell you what the scientific names are for remedies. So you might have looked it up with the name that we know in homeopathy, but you can look up the scientific names in books like this. Okay, so if you want to look it up in Jan Sholten's and you put it in and it doesn't come out, but it's a polycrest. Why doesn't it come out? It's really strange. It's because you need to know the scientific name for it. Jan Sholten always gives it a number like this. Okay, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but these numbers have something to do with the identity of the remedy in terms of its disposition, where it is in life, how included it feels in its community, how it feels about its tasks in life, these kinds of issues. So if you look in Jan Sholten's work, you're going to find this disposition. If he feels rejected by the family, you're going to find what are the major symptoms. It's pretty much like any Materia Medica in that sense, excepting these kinds of descriptions are not so common because in traditional homeopathy, Helleborus is used mainly as a fever remedy. And so we don't know much about the disposition, and the community of people around him have been looking for that. Okay, so the scientific name for Helleborus is Helleborus niger, and it has a number here. This lower this number is, it means it's not as far along in the periodic table. So it's lower down here rather than up here. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail, but this middle number, that's what that means. And this last number is the stage that it's at. So it's stage 6, stage 10, it goes all the way to 18, starts at 1 over here. So, where they are in life, in the progress in their life. So Nux machata is called, the scientific name is Myristica fragrant, which is not nutmeg, right? And you can't look it up by just looking up this part of it. You have to look up this part. So it's a bit frustrating for me because you always not always, but sometimes you have a 2-step process. And so Nux machata doesn't look at all like our patient. His senses are not affected. He doesn't have fainting fits. He's unconscious when he has epilepsy. So it doesn't look at all like him. So you say, no, that can't be it. This guy, our patient is well accepted. He doesn't feel accepted. It's not a nerve problem. So this is how you kind of begin to throw out remedies and feel that, okay, this probably is one that I want to research. Okay, so where is Conium? Now, you don't have to learn this all right now, but I'm just telling you the lay of the land. This is the map. All of the plants are organized according to their relationship in evolution. Okay, so these are remedies that evolved early in the evolution of our planet, and these evolved much later. These are all the flowering plants. And Conium is in the carrot family, which is in the Apiales family. And it's at the top of this tree here. The number is 66.70. Okay, so these plants evolved later So they have the highest level of development among the plants. And as you see by these numbers, these first three numbers, this indicates the level of development of the plant, these first three numbers. You know, they're all divided into the family of plants first, then their classes and subclasses, and, you know, these are all, no, I think I'm using the wrong word, but anyway, they're divided up, and so each of these have a number, okay? And so you know how evolved the plant is, but also how evolved the person is, okay? So if we look at the periodic table, there's what Jan Sholten does is he draws a correspondence between the periodic table and this genealogy. And what essentially what happens is one of these things is upside down, because the most highly evolved one is here, and the least highly evolved one is here. So just to make this a little bit simpler to understand, it's easier to turn the tree upside down and look at this right side up, right? It doesn't matter which one you're going to turn upside down. The flowering plants, which Conium is, it's in the Apialides family here, are all in the Lanthium and the Aurum family. They're all in here where I've painted it yellow. Okay, so these and these all have a character, a certain kind of disposition. And the Lanthanites have a strong leadership, but they have a spiritual aspect to them. My student's patient, or her father, didn't seem all that spiritual, but the Lanthanites generally have that aspect to him. And since his wife was quite spiritual, and since her death, he suddenly began to deal with the fact that he's going to die eventually, and he's experiencing that as a kind of a spiritual awakening. Here we have this series here is all called the gold series. Above that is the silver series, and above that is the iron series. Okay, so they're all named by the major element in them. Aurum is Au, is gold, and argentum is Ag, means silver, and ferrum is iron, Fe, and going up like that, like I've told you before. Okay, so each of these have a certain kind of meaning, and the Lanthanites, or the ones that include Aurum also, have this leadership and spirituality. They're kind of the king, and the silver is the queen. Okay, so these here, the archetype for these are the queen. It's art and culture. It's helping the king, essentially. And then at the iron, you have the working people gathering together in a village and working together, and the importance of work. So we thought at first that it was here. But for his epilepsy issue, the remedy that I've found is Conium, and it's down here. It has more to do with spirituality and leadership and being the king. Okay, so we've actually changed in the same person, and I suspect this remedy could work also, but it just won't deal with his epilepsy right now. Okay, and also he's having a brain problem, right? His brain is being affected. So that's a kind of, if you call your brain as your spiritual area, it's a kind of spiritual area. So if we look at this situation here, this leadership they want to be their own boss. And it appears that he's very concerned with being independent. They have an inner world. They want to meet their shadow. And they feel very responsible for themselves. They're reflective and have strong sexuality as well as spirituality. They have brain diseases and many other diseases, but they're kind of high-level diseases. They're not things like stomach problems. They're not lower down. So these are the lanthanides, and they're all the flowering plants are here. None of these other plants here have flowers in the same way. Some of these down here do have flowers, but for some reason these are thought of as the major flowering plants. So Conium is in stage 12. So you want to know what the character of stage 12 is. Stage 12 is overdoing it. He's threatened from all directions. They're very disappointed. They want to repeat the success of the past. In stage 11, they feel they only need to take care of their family. They have no external threats. But now, in stage 12, external threats are much bigger. Conium is going to be here, around here. And these, I don't know, if you start reading about this, sometimes the Conium, the plant will share some characteristics with neighboring elements here. Okay. But anyway, so here's gallium. Here, we talked about gallium before, and stage 13. It's a different one, and it's the same person. I wouldn't fall apart. It's really very close on the periodic tables. So here is Conium. It's called poisonous hemlock. It attracts insects by its smell. There's another plant called coriander, which is in the same family, and the name for it is actually bug smell. It smells like a bug. These plants have an insect-like quality. They're highly mentalized. They think that rationality is very important. And in the case of the insect, they're trying to keep their mind and body together. They're trying to keep it all together in a very rational way. They want to be independent. When I say an insect, I mean remedies that help cure people who have some kind of problem that come from insects. Okay, so, and these insects have high sexual desire, and their sexual organs are affected. And all of these qualities describe Conium maculatum, and we're going to go into that next. What we know about Conium is paralysis is ascending. It starts in the feet and it goes up. They're suddenly weak, they're suddenly sick, like an epileptic seizure, and they have an early senility. I wouldn't say 80 is all that early, but this is something he's been dealing with through medications. And Conium's vertigo is as if things in the room were whirling around you, and that's a little bit unusual. The more normal kind of vertigo is the one where you feel like you are whirling around, and they're moving around you because my eye muscles are not working properly. And they have paroxysms from hysteria, from a lack of sexual intercourse, or a felt lack of sexual satisfaction. Socrates actually complained about the tyranny of sexual desire when he was young. And why am I mentioning Socrates? Well, we'll get to that. He's a very important archetype for Conium. That's why when I saw this case, I thought, oh, that's it. Conium is an excellent remedy for castrated old dogs. We fix our dogs, right? And when they get old, this not being able to have sexual satisfaction feels like a real problem. I'm sure it did when they were younger, but it's much worse when they're older, if they need Conium. So this is the wonderful pictures by Vicki Madison, and it might give you a little bit more feeling about it. So here he is having a weak memory, having trouble with concentration. That's our patient, right? They're getting disoriented, feeling senile, no tumors, no eye problems, but this vertigo is something that's happening. The room is moving around them. And so they feel the vertigo when they're trying to turn in bed, for example, not necessarily when they're standing up only. And what is this paralysis that starts at the feet. They suddenly become very weak at the feet, and the paralysis starts at the feet. Well, it's very interesting that Plato wrote about Socrates' death, and he was ordered to drink poison, drink hemlock by the elder committee of Athens, and he took it like, okay, they want me to die, I can die, no big deal. But one of the things he complained about was the sexual, being young means that you're being overruled. All of your common sense is being overruled by sexuality. And he really wanted to have this rationality, and he's talking to all these young people, trying to get them to be more rational and not to be emotion-centered. And this is Conium. This is Conium's thing, and that's why it's very useful to use this kind of archetype when you're trying to learn a remedy. So we look at the pre-analysis that of our patient. And pre-analysis is the analysis before I did the analysis. We've already done the analysis, but does it match? And the areas we had, I don't know why I copied this one. Oh, anyway, we actually have the information, and we have some of the detail. And can we find it? I copied out this from Jan Sholten's Curative, and because it's easy to copy, not because it's necessarily the best place. But, you know, everything I've been talking about here, the rationality, the desire to stick to material relativity, being alone and divorced, you know, lacking a sexual mate is a big deal, desiring space and simplicity. I mean, all of these things are what our patient talked about, and it's part of the pre-analysis too. And so the memory becomes weak, and they can't do, you know, mental things. It's funny, they tell the color of the hair, and you know, it's a common remedy for senility, so it's common for getting old. He's cold, but many remedies are cold, so that's not particularly helpful. The hot remedies are a little more unusual. And he had injuries and blows. Remember, my patient was kicked from the back near his testicles, and that healed. So this remedy will heal old remedies. And I suspect that if he has brain damage from falling, it might help him. So his mental capacities might increase. And he seems to have, he's sleeping too long, but he's also having a hard time sleeping. He's having both. Okay, so vomiting, and trouble walking. So all this gait problem is discussed here. And there's some problem with the heart, which our patient had. Okay, I wasn't thrilled in a way with this description, because I remember the description in Jan Sholten's book, and I thought it was better than this one. This one is, I think he puts things up on the net, and then when he publishes it, he's got it edited a little bit better. But anyway, he puts up there also some of the classical authors writing about that remedy. So Henry Ellen has a very well-known book. And when you read about this in a very short period here, it kind of describes our patient in a little bit better. The rigid muscular fiber, debility of old people, complaints from a blow or fall. Lack of memory, vertical. In a much shorter thing, you can see that our patient is being described, and it matches the pre-analysis. So what you're always hoping is that the Materia Medica will describe the disposition of the patient. And you're going to get better luck with that with old new authors. Remedies that are really well known, the old authors, the traditional authors, will describe their mental condition very well. But a lot of remedies were used mainly because the main problem before the invention of antibiotics was inflammation. And so there's a lot of description about inflammation and not much about disposition. So I felt that this book was better written. I mean, it had all of the factors kind of written more succinctly. I liked it better. But you can see that, yeah, we have our patient is pretty well described by Conium, much better than the other remedies that we looked at. All right? And, okay, I knew, and you didn't have a patient like this, but there is a remedy like this, there's really enough information. And the fantastic thing about what Jan Sholten is doing is these remedies that we don't know much about, that the old authors only described in terms of inflammations, are described in terms of disposition, which really is a shortcut to understanding many remedies. Okay? So, how about giving other remedies during a chronic treatment? This is a totally different subject. Okay, I'm assuming you're going to send me feedback and tell me that I confused you with this or that, or that you wish I would present things in this way or that way. You're going to give me some feedback so I can improve. But there's one question that my student asked me that I think is really important, and it's maybe a little bit difficult to understand. Maybe I'll go over it many times. So our patient after the epileptic seizures needs proteins and a glass of Coke. His daughter comes over, fries him eggs, gives him more proteins, and gives him some Coke. And so we thought maybe this coca would help him after he's had a seizure. And then so I looked up coca in Cajur. It's in all of the other books too. So there's nothing that special about it. But they're decompensated from overexertion. It's the herb that's given when you're going mountain climbing in the Himalayas, for example. And they have these other emotional stuff. And it doesn't particularly well describe our patient, but it's not like remedy that matches him perfectly or anything like that. But it may be a palliative to help him overcome the effects of seizures. But the problem is my student will be asking me, should I be giving coca as a remedy? And the answer comes from my teachers. These people have had 40, 50 years of being a homeopath, and I trust them better than I do myself, for sure. And Lou Klein and George Vithoulkas both say that remedies are basically energy. They're not on the physical level. So when you give one energetic remedy and another one, you get confusion, and pretty soon you're going to get confused symptoms. I don't always listen to this advice, and Lou Klein says he has never given two remedies at the same time. I've become loose in my old age. But what they're saying is pretty much, it's the gold standard. You don't want to be giving two sets of instructions to your patient. So you want to avoid palliative remedies like this. It might work, it might help, but if she's giving Conium, she doesn't want to be giving coca at the same time. It's too much confusion. We really want to know the reaction of Conium. I never would give the same ones if I don't already know what the reaction is, because you can't judge what the reaction is if you give them all at the same time. I hope this has been of some help to you, and this has been a case of a hardworking 80-year-old with seizures. And I hope this gives you a little bit of insight as to how you would use not just the polarity analysis, but also other systems, and that approaching homeopathy using systems is probably more efficient, it certainly is for me, than just trying to find the information through search engines, for example. To have some kind of organization of remedies will help you. This is Ellen Madono, and I'm coming from Tokyo Homeopathy. And I really appreciate any feedback that you can give me. I don't know what you're using to see this, but if you have a like button or a subscribe button, please press it and let the bots know what we're doing. But most of all, let other people know. And my goal is to help more people to use homeopathy effectively. Okay, thank you very much.